Hey, what's up, everyone? DREAGEN here to tell you that you should be reading Relic. So, Relic is a 1995 science fiction horror slash thriller novel written by Douglas Preston and Lincoln Child, and basically picks up off on the heels of a failed Amazonia expedition in the late 80s to discover a prehistoric tribe called the Cathoga. Quite possibly the oldest living tribe of human beings still left in the world, and they're basically kind of been cut off from all this time by living on this plateau. The expedition quickly basically kind of falls apart, with there being infighting and some people not wanting to push on. Before ultimately it ends with a series of tragic deaths. Fast forward to 1995, present day, and we're dealing with now a series of murders in the Museum of American Natural History. New York City, but not quite the one you might be familiar with. It's kind of a fictionalized version of the museum where the writers kind of at some point worked there and they kind of borrowed elements from the real one, which if you've ever been there and you're reading the book, you'll probably pick up on a few areas and components of it that like, oh yeah, I think I know what this is supposed to be. But as a whole, it's a reimagining of the museum. So if you're reading it and you are familiar with that museum, don't expect to feel like, you're walking through the same halls that you might be familiar with, as I first did when I went to the Natural History Museum, and I realized like, oh, this is a lot different from the book. But anyway, so they find the body of two young boys who sadly were killed. Their bodies are kind of savaged, and their heads have been removed. They've been decapitated. Now, right away, this starts raising certain questions because these murders resemble a series of murders that were found on a ship that had run aground in Louisiana some years before, and then following those murders up the eastern seaboard of the United States before they just kind of stopped around New Jersey, New York City, implying that whoever was doing it just gave up or stopped or, was killed. But now this MO is popping up again. And Agent Pendergast, an FBI agent from the Louisiana field office, kind of comes up and starts putting these connections together. It basically starts saying that he believes that the murders happening today at the museum are in fact linked to those that came before. However, that's not the only thing these murders are linked to. It becomes clear to several key characters involved that perhaps these murders have something to do with this failed Amazonia expedition from years prior. The problem here, though, is that the museum hierarchy seems to be pushing back. There's a lot of resistance. They don't want people digging into this. They don't want people snooping around, as it were. And that begs the question, why? Do they know something that we don't? Are they perhaps a bit more familiar about the circumstances surrounding these incidences? In addition to that, this museum kind of has a bit of an urban legend to it. It's called the Museum Beast. Supposedly, there is a large creature of some sort roaming the dark museum halls and in the sub-basements. But at night, if you're working late, you might see it moving behind bookshelves or moving in the hallways in the shadows. It's kind of like a Bigfoot in the museum. Everyone knows someone who says they've seen it, yet no one's ever seen it. So naturally, when these murders start taking place, because there are more, not long after a security guard is murdered, much in the same way, rumors and talk of the Museum Beast start cropping up, saying, okay, A, is this thing maybe real? And B, could it be behind these killings? I mean, these are rather savage murders, It wouldn't be a large stretch of the imagination to think that some kind of animal of some kind might be behind them. Naturally, the museum staff, the people running the show are trying to say, no. There's clearly a deranged killer running around. There's no monster here. That would be silly, right? Until basically we start finding that perhaps not who, is killing all these people might be doing so more out of a sense of need. Several of the bodies are discovered what portions of the brain consume, particularly the hypothalamus, which contains numerous hormones important for brain development. And it seems like, these parts of the brains are being eaten, meaning that this is less of just a killing of a large predator just looking to feed, and more of like something that almost is addicted, more like an addict. It's attacking out of need, meaning it will do whatever it can to suppress the instinct to kill for as long as it can to keep from being caught before it becomes need becomes too great, and it can't hold back any longer. And that's when it ventures out, and that's when it starts killing. The question is, why now? If this thing has been in the museum this entire time, why is it suddenly killing out in the open now? What's changed? And that basically becomes the crux of the story. That becomes basically the big mystery once they kind of find out that perhaps what's killing people isn't human. Why now? If this is something that has always been there, why is it behaving this way now? And that's kind of the story as it is. It's these group of characters who are kind of working against this, dark side of the museum in terms of kind of the hierarchy to basically figure out what they're hiding and why. What did they have to lose by, the existence of this animal, this thing coming to light? And it basically deals with the concept of like monsters and what makes something a monster. You have something that is large, grotesque, terrifying, and killing people. And yet, once you read through the story and you kind of discover the circumstances for yourself, which I'm not going to spoil for you, you start to realize that perhaps the greatest monsters of all are not things with big teeth and claws, but it's the people around us. That perhaps it's not what's doing the killing, but what might be or who might be enabling it to do the killing. It's basically you have something that cannot help itself. It is what it is and will do what it will do. In a lot of ways like The Outsider that we discussed when I did my recommendation of Watchers. But it's more or less, even in that story, was the outsider the monster, or was it the men who made the outsider? In this story, is it this creature, is it this Umboon, this he who walks on all fours from the Cathoga tribe that is the monster? Or is it perhaps those who are aware of its existence and are choosing not to do anything about it, and furthermore, preventing others from doing anything about it, thus allowing more innocent people to be killed? And that's kind of the moral conundrum of the story. It's like, what makes something a monster? Is it just a visual aesthetic? Or is there something more to it than that? Is there a deeper meaning behind the term a monster? And that's what's important in this story. And that's what it asks you, the reader, to kind of discern for yourself. So with that said, I recommend Relic. It is probably one of my favorite books, probably one of my top 5 favorite books very easily. It's written extremely well, and it kind of basically plays out a little bit like Jaws at the museum, which is interesting enough. One of their editors had told them what they should be writing when they handed in the first draft, and it kind of played it more straight as more like a murder with perhaps a more human killer behind it, and basically the whole vibe, it basically just felt like a Jaws story, something that was large and dangerous that could strike out of the shadows, and using basically the museum as almost like a modern Gothic backdrop was something we hadn't really seen before, and worked very well. So much so that not only did this book get a sequel entitled Reliquary, which will no doubt end up on this show, but also a feature film in 1997 called The Relic, because the makes all the difference in the world. Now, while being a very different, kind of a different beast, no pun intended, from the book, did indeed capture a lot of the same kind of mood and atmosphere that the book kind of thrives on. So that one might end up on the You Should Be Watching show. But for right now, if you have not read Relic, I highly recommend it. Again, it's a good page turner. It'll keep you asking questions, and it's one of those great mystery stories that'll make you want to dive in deeper. So as the characters dive in deeper, as the characters peel back the layers of this mystery and get deeper and find themselves almost immersed completely in it, you, the reader, will find yourself doing the very same thing right along with them. So, have you read Relic? If so, what did you think? If you haven't, check it out, come back, leave some comments. Let me know what you think. Again, it's one of my favorite stories. It's a kind of when I think of a page turner, that term that they'll use, Relic is one of those books that always come to mind immediately, because for me, I literally just could not stop flipping through it. And it's probably one of the books I've read the fastest, just because I couldn't put it down, and I kept wanting to know, okay, what does this mean? How does that work? How does that lead to this? It's very, very well written, and I think you'll enjoy it. So anyway, that's my recommendation. Leave some comments below if you haven't already. Please subscribe, and we'll catch you on the next one. Peace!